So here's a question I received from Jürgen. He's submitted it via the website. We've got like a little question where you can submit your questions, answer them in a video. Links in the description for that. And the question is when I start mastering with outboard gear, what are the essential units? ADDA, converter, summing, EQ compressor, limiter, and what is the minimum budget to start with? Right, to answer that, the essential units. One thing I will say is you are only as good as your weakest link. So, if you've got a great EQ, great compressor, rubbish ADDA converters, you've got rubbish compressor and EQ. Then over to monitoring. If you've got rubbish monitoring, everything before it's rubbish. So, it's kind of like if you're going to go high end, you've got to go each part of the chain all the way through to the output needs to be top level, or all the same, kind of as good as you can afford, as good as your budget can stretch. You can spend, for instance, I mean, this is going to the top of the level. I mean, we've got next door in the mastering rooms, for instance, we've got a Elysia Alpha compressor, and we've got an Unfairchild 672. So those two, you're talking for the Unfairchild, you're talking 13,500. It's a stupid amount of money for top end compression, but you're talking it's an Unfairchild. Then you've got things like the Alpha, that's 10 grand for an Alpha, but they are top level. In terms of budget, you don't have to be spending that. Obviously, if you're spending any more than 2 grand, you're going to have a good sounding EQ, a good sounding compressor. But you've then got to go with good sounding converters. So don't get I don't know, a Great River EQ for 3.5 or a Golly EQ for 3.5. Don't get one of them and then run it through a Focusrite interface or a UAD Apollo or something like that. Don't do that, because you're not getting the best. It's not mastering grade. Great for production, perfectly fine for production, nothing wrong there. It's not mastering grade. So you wouldn't be running mastering gear through these sorts of converters. And then, for instance, you go further down the chain, you've got monitors. You don't then go into, let's say, a pair of KLK rockets, because the difference, you don't have top end EQs and compressors going into rockets, because you can't physically hear how good these EQs and compressors are. So in terms of what is essential, I mean, if you were starting out and what's essential, one EQ is essential. Try and get one that's got mid-side. You can get plenty of EQs that are, EQs, stereo and mid-side. So you've got the option to flick between the two. Then you've got compressor, a good compressor. You could probably talk maybe 10 grand to get a really small entry level mastering chain that's going to do okay jobs. You're going to get an EQ compressor. You could get a limiter. You don't necessarily need one. You can come back into the box and use the limiting in the box for that. Then great DA converters, and then good monitoring as well. You're probably looking at about 10 grand minimum to just set up EQ compression, converters and monitors. To get something that is half decent, that would cost about 10 grand. Right, let's go to the next section of the question. So the next part of the question is, or would you recommend staying inside the box as long as possible and not going outside with the signal? It depends on your budget. If you're gonna go, put it this way, if you're talking just going in and out of the box, that would imply that you've already got top end DA converters into top-end monitors. So let's disregard the converters and the monitors, because whether you're digital or analog, you still need great sounding DA converters, great sounding monitors to do any sort of mastering. Otherwise, you just cannot hear what you need to be able to hear. So if we just factor in now, let's say EQs, compressors, some special processing, for instance, you know, is it important to do EQ out the box? Is it important to do compression out the box? The thing is starting out, you don't have to. You don't have to, but you always will have an inferior to sound to someone that is working out the box. For instance, you working in the box, you would never be able to, and it's pretty much proven fact, and I know this because we've tested and we've tried to do it. You will, like, if you compared an in the box mastering chain, if for instance we were to work on an in the box mastering chain and compare it to our mastering chain, now bear in mind that, like, our mastering chain, just the mastering equipment alone is about £100,000, and it's I'm not saying that just to kind of say, oh, we got £100,000 mastering chain. I'm saying that because you put a value on it. That is where you'd want to get to eventually, going from in the box to that. And the reason is because a mastering chain like that, it can achieve things that are simply not possible in the box. You cannot achieve it. And I'm telling you that based on the fact that we cannot physically achieve it. It's not possible to achieve the sound that you can get out the box with real good quality compression, EQ and other processing. You physically cannot get that in the box. There's a certain level of detail, clarity and depth that you get mastering in the analog world that you just do not get in the box. The question being, should I stay in the box? It all depends on your budget. So stay in the box until you've got a budget where you can go, right, I can really make a difference now by getting a good out the box EQ, a good out the box compressor. You know, I've got £6,000, I can buy a Masalek MEA2. Right, I'm gonna buy one of them. You know, I've got £10,000 for an alpha compressor. Brilliant. Now I've got a really good EQ, a really good compressor. Now I'm going to fit a Whitestone for my saturation. Then you're going to have a nice, lovely, albeit quite simple, but a really good top quality mastering chain. It's not essential though, but you are always going to produce an inferior product to someone like us or someone who has a really good mastering chain. The next part of the question was, are services like Access Analog and mixanalog.com good alternatives instead of investing in outboard gear? Quick, simple answer to that is no. Because as good as those sorts of things are, you gain access to robotics over the tops of all these different bits of equipment. Brilliant. I mean, like, in terms of technology and what you're actually getting, it's really cool. But it's not, you know, you need to be working on something physically. Otherwise you're moving a mouse, it's just not the same. Even if the sound quality is the same, it's partly as well down to, for instance, knowledge of what to do with that piece of equipment, right? It's not good enough to just go, right, okay, they've got a Manley massive passive there, right, well, that's an EQ, let's just, all right, yeah, EQ, oh, put in all this different EQ in. You buy one of those, you will use it totally different to if you were to use it over the internet via a robotic arm. The way you work when something is yours and you sit in front of it and you take time to learn that piece of equipment. Don't tell me you can learn a piece of equipment over the internet with a robotic arm. You just can't. So you're never, ever, ever, ever going to achieve the kind of sound that you want to achieve using those sorts of services. You just cannot. I've had to play with them, and they're fun. It's fun to just play around with bits. We was doing demos with them at one point, and yeah, they were. It was good fun, and but it's like if you was to say to someone who doesn't know how to master, right, jump onto this and move things around and get something that you can get that sounds nice to you. It kind of, unless you have the knowledge and understanding of how that piece of hardware works and how it works going into the next piece and all that, you do a bad job. Part and parcel of sitting down and working with equipment is that you sit there hands-on and you're involved in it. The whole hands-on aspect of it is very important. That's why I've got a digital console here. The fact that it is so hands-on is the only reason that I moved away from an analog console to a digital console, because I get the full control, and full control over anything is partly down to the way to why you get such a good sound. So yeah, I hope that answers all your questions, but that's my honest opinion on that whole subject. So all the best with building your studio. I hope your budget meets your kind of expectations of what you want to achieve, but ultimately you can start small and gradually build up. So start with an entry-level mastering chain, and then gradually upgrade the converters, upgrade the EQ, upgrade the compressor, upgrade the monitoring, until you get to a point where, let's face it, you can't upgrade anymore because you physically have the best. That's kind of where we've got to, but there's still a lot that we look at buying. There's some, after time, there's only so far you can go with. Once you've got a Maselec MEA2, where do you go next? You get a Buzz REQ2, and then you start doubling up. So you start doubling up on stuff. How many compressors do you actually need until something really game-changing comes out, like the Golly dynamic shelving unit and the Q version as well. We've just put the shelving and the Q version in because they are game changing. They are different to anything else that's in that chain. And yeah, one thing you don't want to do is buy two of this, two things that do the same. Everything has a purpose. It's fine to have two EQs. Like we have 3 or 4 EQs, but they each have their specific role in the mastering chain. None of them double up and do the same thing. So yeah, I hope that answers your questions. And if anybody has any questions they want answered, drop a comment, or send a message via the link in the descriptions.